Hello, thank you for attending our second Money Monday webinar. This is a series of 5 financial webinars the library will be hosting and are presented by Money Management International, a nonprofit that provides consumers with free credit counseling and education. Tonight's speaker, Tara Alderete, will be talking about how to make the most of your money by knowing where it is going. Tonight's participants will learn how to take control of their finances by tracking expenses and assessing spending habits. Future webinars will be on May 3rd, credit reports and credit scores, May 10th, when income decreases but the bills don't, and May 17th, avoiding scams and identity theft. If you miss one, all of these webinars will be available for viewing at the library's YouTube channel, which can be found by searching for the Lake Park Public Library. And now over to Tara.
All right, thank you, Judy. Hello, everyone. My name is Tara Alderete. I'm the Director of Enterprise Learning at Money Management International, or MMI. I'm going to get started with the presentation. I'm really excited to talk to you tonight about managing income and expenses. It's an important topic that we all should probably be talking about from the time we're really little, but we don't oftentimes. And so something happens and we're not quite sure how to put pen to paper and start the process of building that budget. So we're going to talk about all the steps involved in creating a strong priority spending plan to keep you on track with your financial goals tonight. So let's get started. Before we jump in and start to talk about the budgeting content and building the priority spending plan, I want to take just a couple of minutes and share some information with you about Money Management International, or MMI. MMI is a full-service nonprofit credit counseling and housing organization. We have been in business for over 50 years, helping consumers, individuals, and families overcome financial obstacles and achieve their financial goals. So we do that through counseling and education. Through our education program, we do online and live financial education webinars. We also provide a free online learning community at learn.mmiuniversity.org, where you can take e-learning courses, access articles, tools, all kinds of great stuff that's updated real time. And then our counseling services provide some really great ways for you to connect with a counselor to talk about your own personal financial situation. If you're not sure where to start, and as we're moving through the content tonight, you're thinking, wow, this is some really good information. I'd like to sit down one-on-one with somebody and talk about my own budget. Please visit us at moneymanagement.org or give us a call and schedule a credit counseling session today. In one of those sessions, you'll work with a counselor one-on-one over the phone, online, or in person when and where it's available. And you'll go through your income and expenses, goals, roadblocks, and you'll create a budget and an action plan. You'll leave that session with a copy of the budget you've created and the items on your action plan, and then all you have to do is live it. Just put it into action. It's a really fantastic service, absolutely free, and the perfect place to start. From there, depending on your situation, we provide other services to help you achieve your goals. So whether that's a debt management plan where we work with servicers and creditors to lower interest rates and consolidate your payment, get you out of debt in 3 to 5 years, whether it's bankruptcy education and counseling, student loan counseling, pre-purchase, foreclosure prevention, housing counseling, or just a credit report review. We offer all the different services that you would need to help you, like I said, remove any roadblocks that are there and then get on track to achieve your financial goals. So again, check us out at moneymanagement.org to schedule that initial session today. Alrighty, so we have a lot to cover in this session. It's really good stuff. So this session is all about the budgeting process, creating a budget or a priority spending plan that works for you, that's realistic, that can help you achieve your financial goals. And so the topics that we're going to cover specifically are determining net income, tracking and documenting your monthly expenses, and believe it or not, there are different types of expenses, and so we'll talk about those, comparing your actual and your planned spending, taking a look at your income and expenses and doing the math to see whether or not you're spending more than you make or not. We'll talk about cash flow solutions, and then finally the importance of monitoring your progress and just some tips and strategies to help you stay on track once you have developed that priority spending plan that works for you. So let's jump in. I like to start this seminar with just sort of an image, right? Because if any of you have ever been in a situation before where, like I said, perhaps things are going along okay, maybe they're not great, but they're okay, and then something happens that forces you to build a budget, this image is probably familiar to you, right? You're probably thinking, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. Or maybe you're thinking, gosh, I've got something in place, but I just don't have enough money. These expenses are piling up, and what do I do? So oftentimes, just taking a step back and really evaluating your situation to create that budget or recreate that budget can be the key. I often think about financial wellness as a puzzle, with all these different pieces that work together to make up a whole strong financial picture. And the budget is really sort of a cornerstone of that puzzle. So before you can tackle credit issues or purchasing a home or saving for an education or building an emergency savings fund, all of those things start with a good, strong budget because it gives your money, every dollar that you make, a purpose. So that's where we start. So what can a good budget help you do? It can actually help you do all of these things. A good, strong budget can help you reduce stress. It can help ensure that your bills are paid on time, which in turn can save you money in late fees and increased interest charges. It can help you reduce or eliminate your debt or live a life without debt because you've budgeted to spend only what you make. It can really show you that you have extra money for discretionary expenses that you might have not thought you had before. It can offer you a way to save not only for emergencies, but for short and long-term goals, and it can help you achieve your goals. So let's first start by talking about net income. This is where we start in the budgeting process. But before we get into the specifics of determining your net income, I want to back up to something I said earlier, and that was that a budget can help you achieve your goals. So I always think about sort of the unofficial first step in a good budgeting process would be to identify your goals. There's a couple of reasons to start here. Whether it's something you want to achieve in 1 year, 5, 10, or 20 years or longer, almost every goal we have has a financial component. And sometimes it can seem daunting, right? So if I use the example of saving for a down payment to purchase a home, and let's say that I have to save, upwards of $20,000, that's a big number. And that can seem like, gosh, I'll never achieve that goal. But if I can take that and break it into smaller chunks and say, I want to save $20,000 over maybe 5 years. Okay, well, I divide that. I only need to save what? $4,000 a year. Okay, if I cut that and divide that by 12, then I need to save less than $1,000, much less, only about $500 a month. And that becomes a little more workable because then I can say, well, maybe it's only over $100 a week. And I can build that into my budget and it becomes a workable goal that I can see my progress and my end date for. So the other reason that it's important to start, I think, by thinking about your short-term, mid-range, and long-term goals is it helps us stay on track not only with achieving those goals, but making good spending choices. So if I've got that strong goal in mind, when I'm at the register and there's an impulse purchase that presents itself, whether it's a candy bar or a pair of shoes or maybe coffee that I didn't have budgeted, it's easy for me to say, oh, that's only a few dollars. It's not really going to make much of a difference. But over time, it does. If I buy a coffee every month or every week or every other day, that really, really adds up. And so a strong goal can help keep me focused because in my mind, I'm like, this isn't in my budget. And if I spend money on this item, whatever it is, how much longer will it take for me to achieve my goal? So starting with those goals is important for a couple of different reasons. So I would say when you get ready to begin the budgeting process, take a moment and think about and jot down where you want to be, short-term, mid-range, and long-term. And then when you build your budget, you can build money in to achieve those goals and see where you are and track your progress. Alrighty, so I always feel remiss if I don't talk about that before we talk about the official steps in building a budget. So let's get back to it. So first we start by determining net income. Now, when we're doing this for the purposes of a budget, we want to make sure that we're using income that we can rely on consistently every month. And so where we'd like to start is by looking at our gross income, which is the income that we make before any deductions, and put that on an income worksheet. And by the way, these worksheets will be attached to this recording, so they're available for you to use. But it's a good idea to see what deductions come out instead of just saying, oh, this is my net number, I'm going to start there. If we start with the gross number and then take a look at the deductions that come out, it makes it easier to spot a situation where maybe unauthorized deductions are happening or more or less than you thought. And then it also gives you an idea of how much money is coming out of your check in different areas as well. So you take a look at your gross income and then you sort of list it out on an income worksheet. All your paycheck sources, how much you earn, what your different deductions are by category. And then you want to make sure you list out other monthly income that you can rely on consistently. And this might be Social Security, it might be child support, it might be income from a second job or a part-time job. The key here is that when we're identifying that net income for the purposes of our budget, we want to make sure it's consistent and reliable. Because if it's not, and we have a month where we don't get it, but we've planned for it, we're in trouble. But on the flip side, if we haven't planned for it and we do get it, that's fantastic. That's additional discretionary income or income to help us achieve our goals. So if we take a look at what this looks like in practice, this gentleman here has his paycheck, and then he's listed out his different deductions, right? So he's got a $100 deduction at the top, another $100 for medical insurance, a combined $100 for life and dental insurance, but he's got additional other monthly income. And so this is kind of an example of how you would list out your income on an income sheet or an income worksheet. And so his income, I think if we do the quick math here, is $1,900 a month. And so you'd want to take that net amount after all deductions that you can rely on a consistent basis, and that's what you want to build as your income. Then we move on to thinking about expenses. And so this sounds easy, but this is where it starts to get a little bit more difficult to put into place. So the first thing is to compare your actual spending to what you think you spend. And so this could be a pretty good exercise. There's actually two different exercises here. So one of the first things you could do is just kind of jot down by category, how much money do I think, if you were to ask me today, how much money do I think I spend on all these different things, right? Rent, groceries, utilities, all the things that I pay for in a month. Just kind of jot that down. But then you do a more formal exercise of tracking your expenses. I don't know if anybody out there has ever done this exercise. If you have, you know where I'm going with this, but it's very eye-opening and very good. So for a period of 30 to 60 days, 30 days, you track your expenses. And now whether you do that on a tracker, like I'll show you an example of, or you use an app on your phone, you just use a notebook. The idea is every time you spend money, even if it's 50 cents at a vending machine, you write that down or you document it. And at the end of 30 days, you go back and take a look at where your money went. So again, I ask, has anybody done this exercise? And if you have, you might be finding yourself saying, oh, yes, I did. And I remember that I found a couple of different things. Man, I spent a whole lot more money than I thought I did on X or Y or Z. For me, it's coffee. I spend a lot more money than I think I do on takeout coffee. The other thing tracking your expenses, though, can help you do is get an accurate picture of where your money goes for when you build your budget. So it shows you those additional budget categories, right, where your money is being spent, but it can also help you identify those budget leaks and busters. When I think about showing us exactly where our money goes, the example that always comes to mind is groceries, right? So if I were to sort of build a budget and say, well, you know, I probably spend $100 a week on groceries. Let's say I shop on a Saturday, make a list, and I spend $100 at the grocery store. So I plan for, let's say, $100 a week, $400 a month on my budget. But by Wednesday, I'm out of milk, I'm out of bread, something has happened, whatever, and I'm back at the grocery store and I spend $20, $50. It's very easy to do. At the end of the month, even though I planned and budgeted to spend $400 on groceries, I actually spent about $600 or $700 on groceries. So I find myself going back and looking at that budget and saying, gosh, I don't understand. I created a plan. I thought I stuck to it. I really kind of stayed within all the things that I need, not want this month. Where is my money? But then I go back to tracking those expenses and I see, I should plan for $700 in groceries, not $400. So that's another good thing that exercise can help us do. So once we've kind of done those and gotten a good idea of our exact monthly expenses, then we document those, right? And so this is kind of like the monthly expense tracking sheet that I was just talking about. And this will also be included in the handouts for this course if you'd like to use it, as well as this, so that you can kind of do the exercise. If you have a significant other or somebody that you share money with, you know, you can kind of sit down ahead of time and say, how much do we think we spend on all this stuff? And then compare the two. It's interesting and eye-opening. So once you do that and you've got a really good idea of your monthly expenses and your monthly income, it's time to do the budget. And so you want to use a worksheet. The one thing that I would say is that the budgeting process is essentially the same, but everybody has a different method. So find the method that works for you, whether it's a spreadsheet, a worksheet like this one, which will be included, you know, an online app, whatever the case may be. But what I would say is put it in a place that's tangible, where you can actually look at it and make adjustments. We don't want to make a budget in our head because oftentimes we forget things or we forget what we said we were going to spend. So just make sure that it's documented somewhere, because your budget should really be a living, breathing document that changes each month based on your situation and your goals. So I like this spreadsheet that we share here because it's pretty concise. It's got your place for income and expenses by category, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But it also has the two columns for your planned and adjusted amounts. And so you can make changes throughout the month. So let's talk a little bit more about these expenses. So we've talked about documenting regular, consistent income. Now let's talk about expenses. There are three different categories of expenses. Those are fixed, variable, and periodic. Now, our fixed expenses are fairly easy to plan for. These are the things that don't change from month to month. So the amount is the same every month. And this might be stuff like your housing costs, you know, your rent or mortgage, maybe your auto loan, maybe your insurance, different things like that might stay the same every month. Pretty easy to plan for. The next category of expenses is a little bit more difficult to plan for. These are variable expenses. Now, these occur every month, but the amount might be different. So a good example of this would be groceries, sometimes your utilities, gas for your car, things like that. Typically, the best way that I like to plan for these expenses is to use an average. So go back at the exercise we did with tracking our spending and, you know, take a look at our statements and stuff like that and determine an average for each of these categories. Let's take utilities, for example. Let's say that my average utility bill is $50. Wouldn't that be nice? So we're going to go with $50 for an average utility bill. So I plan for that. And next month, it's pretty nice. I don't run my AC or my heat. My bill is pretty low. In fact, when I get it, it's only $25. My instinct is to say, yes, I have an extra $25. I can go treat myself to coffee, right? But truly, because this is a variable expense, what I should be doing is earmarking that additional $25 for the next month, just hanging on to it, because the next month comes and I have used my AC quite a bit. And in fact, my bill is $75, but I've only budgeted for $50. I'm going to need that extra money. So that's where, the budgeting process is kind of easy to talk about, harder to do. And so we'll talk about some solutions for managing that cash flow here in just a minute. But that's a good way to deal with those variable expenses. And then the third category of expenses are those periodic expenses. And these are probably the most challenging to plan for, because periodic expenses only happen maybe a few times a year, and the amounts might be different. So we see that an example of this might be car maintenance and repairs. It could be holiday expenses, back to school time expenses, things like that. So the best way to plan for our periodic expenses is, again, go back and look at history, make a plan and a projection and say, okay, I think probably this year I'm going to end up spending, let's do some easy math, a total of $1,200 on all my different periodic expenses. What I should do is divide that $1,200 amount by 12 and set aside $100 a month in my budget, so that when that periodic expense does come up, I don't have to juggle things to meet that expense. I have the money already set aside. I'm not derailing my other plans or goals. So when we talk about these different categories of expenses, we talk about some examples in each. I always like to talk about savings, right? And I also like to talk about the difference between needs versus wants. So as we think about our expenses in three different categories, another helpful exercise is to really sit down and think about, what are those items that I absolutely need? These are my necessity items. I have to have them to survive. It's probably stuff like shelter, food, clothing, transportation, medication, things like that. And then what are my wants items? These are the nice to have, but not necessary. So this might be stuff like cable TV, personal expenses like getting my nails done or my hair done on a regular basis professionally, designer clothing, stuff like that, that if my budget isn't lining up and I need to make some adjustments, I've identified areas already where I could make some temporary adjustments, making sure that my priority expenses are always paid. So when we think about it in categories like that, we often talk about savings. Where does that go? Is that a priority expense? Is that a need? Or is that a want? And I would say that it's a need, right? So we should make sure that we're planning in our budget at minimum to build an emergency savings account. The suggested amount in an emergency savings account is 3 to 6 months of your living expenses. But again, if that goal seems too high, start lower. Start with a goal to save maybe $1,000 or $500. And once you reach that goal, bump it up. Say, okay, now I'm going to save $1,500 until you have enough set aside in an emergency fund to handle any unexpected event that might come up without derailing your budget. And so that I would consider a priority item. So you'll see that we do have that built in here as a fixed expense. So we've gotten to the point where we've identified income, we've listed our expenses, now we got to do the math, right? We just take the total consistent income and we subtract our total amount of expenses, and are we balanced? If we have extra money left over, that's fantastic. That's the situation we all want to be in. But if we do, we want to make sure we're asking ourselves some questions to make sure that our budget is on track. Do I have money for financial goals that I've established? Did I think about where I want to be in 5 years, 10 years? And am I saving for the down payment on that house? Or am I saving for the European vacation that I want to take? Whatever. Do I have adequate insurance protection, or do I need to take a look at that and reevaluate and maybe bump it up? Am I paying just the minimum amount of my debts, or could I use this extra income to reduce my debt even faster? Am I contributing regularly to savings to build my emergency fund, or could I build that even faster? So these are some sort of questions to ask yourself if after you do the math, you find that you have income left over. Oftentimes, a more likely scenario is that we do the math and expenses exceed income. And if that's the case, then there are a few different ways to handle this. We can either increase income, decrease expenses, or do a little bit of both. And so we already talked a little bit about just kind of identifying wants versus needs and temporarily reducing or cutting out those things that we don't necessarily need to get by. So we talk about just quickly some strategies to help you reduce expenses in the different categories that we discussed. So first, fixed expenses. I think oftentimes folks think that it's impossible to reduce fixed expenses like your mortgage or your rent or your car payment, your insurance, things like that. But that's not necessarily the case. Particularly if interest rates are low and the market is good and you own a home, you might consider refinancing your home to get a better rate and a lower mortgage payment. You might consider trying to negotiate the rates that you have on some of those fixed expenses. Contact your insurance provider and see if there's a break or a reduction that's available to you. Oftentimes there are. Factor in all the different costs and be creative in ways that you might be able to reduce those fixed expenses, even for the long term. Then we talk about reducing those periodic expenses, particularly for those wants items. And so here's just some additional strategies where you might see this money add up pretty quickly. I think when we do the exercise where we track our expenses, oftentimes, like I said, for me, it's coffee, but oftentimes folks say, gosh, I spend way more money going through a drive-through to grab dinner than I ever thought I did. So just some ideas. You might eat out less often, cook more at home. Shop with a list. Curb habits. Tara, stop buying that coffee, right? Cut back on your entertainment expenses, or think about ways that you could do fun stuff that's less money or free. Check out local publications and websites and stuff like that for things that are happening in your community. Your library is an awesome resource to find out, like concerts in the park and festivals and just all kinds of free stuff. Perhaps you cut back on non-essential clothing, designer haircuts, comparison shop, shop in bulk if that's going to save you money. Contact your cell internet provider. Can you bundle services? Are you paying more for insurance? So just some ideas and places that you might start to reduce expenses. And again, it might just be temporary until your situation changes. Then we think about strategies to reduce periodic expenses. And so some of these things really help us. Resisting impulse buying can be a big one. Shopping with a list is another. So whether it's groceries, back to school time, holidays, anything like that, set a budget for that event. Determine what you can afford, make a list, and stick to it. So that kind of goes with planning ahead. So these are just a few different tips and strategies that might work. But I think when we talk about budgeting and the budgeting process, if I don't start you thinking about ways that you could cut expenses, then we're a little off track. There's one last technique that I wanted to share with you around reducing expenses, and that's the idea of step-down spending. So this is pretty cool. The idea behind step-down spending is that you reduce your cost incrementally for different events. So let's say we take the example of going to the movies, right? And we start at, I want to go to the movies. And so I look at my initial cost for going to the movies, maybe 2 people in the evening and getting drinks and snacks at the movies. That might cost me $100. How can I step that down? Well, if I go to a matinee instead, I might save some money. I might step that down to $80. If I go to a matinee and I, bring snacks from home, I might step that down even further, let's say $50. I could step that down even further if I had a date at home and I watched on Netflix, things like that. So you get the gist, but the idea is step down spending, and you could do that in any category, really. And you could say, well, how can I do this just a little bit cheaper? What you might find is that as you get more engaged in saving money and finding where your money goes and kind of doing this sort of stuff, it becomes almost like a game. It's like, wow, I saved this much money this month. Can I save even more next month? And how does that look? All right, so let's take a recap. At this point, we've determined income, tracked and documented monthly expenses, created the budget, done the math, made adjustments, staying within the budget. We still get to a point where I'm scratching my head. I don't have money left over at the end of the month. What's the problem? It could be cash flow. And so just to talk about some possible solutions, and all this does is help you keep track of where your money goes so that you can, fill those budget gaps that we kind of talked about a little bit earlier. One possible solution I always like to think about is the envelope method. And you could do this literally with cash in envelopes. If you use cash for expenses, you might identify, let's say, 20 different envelopes. And, one is rent, one is groceries, one is clothing, so on and so forth. You put the amount allocated for that expense in cash in the envelope, and when the money's gone, the money's gone. You can't spend any more in that category. You can also do this, though, with online accounts. So when we think about saving for emergencies, maybe you've got an emergency savings fund, but you've also got a fund for variable expenses and periodic expenses and things like that, and you sort of separate them that way. It can really help. Another possible solution for cash flow issues is the calendar method. And this is really just taking a calendar and writing down due dates for everything so that you can start to line up your pay periods with due dates so that you're not incurring late fees and additional charges, which can oftentimes throw your budget off track. I think the average late fee, let's say on a credit card, is $35. If we were to combine, one of those plus, let's say, a late fee for your cell phone bill and a late fee for one utility bill, you could easily be $100 over your budget just in fees because the payment date didn't line up with your pay date. So planning ahead to make sure that you're in line with a calendar can really help. And then another possible solution is using software programs and apps, things like Mint and Quicken, even some of the tools and strategies that are available on our website can really help you keep track of that cash flow when it's coming in and when it's going out so that you can maximize that to reduce or completely eliminate additional money going out each month. And then the final step in any good budgeting process is to monitor your progress. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I'll say it again. Really, when I think about budgeting, not only is it the cornerstone of your financial picture, your financial puzzle, but it's a living, breathing document. It would be great if we could spend 45 to 60 minutes together talking about budgeting and then you never had to think about it again. But that's just it's not how it works. Our budget changes as our lifestyle changes, and oftentimes that's every day. So some tips here would be to record and document your income and expenses, and then evaluate the totals for each category regularly. If you have your budget built out in a place where you can access it and you're taking a look at those planned and actual expenses, maybe on a weekly basis, you can make adjustments weekly and say, wow, I budgeted $100 in entertainment expenses this month. Today's the 15th and I've already spent $90 in entertainment. I really need to pull back. It's much easier if I identify that mid-month than getting to the end of the month and saying, whoa, I spent $200, but I only planned for $100. Now what do I do? So we should be looking at that budget on a regular basis so that we can, make those changes. At minimum, you want to make sure you're reviewing your budget once a month to say, here's what I planned, here's what I actually spent, and here's my adjustments for the month coming up. Again, as your goals change, your income changes, different things like that, your situation, you want to make sure you're reviewing your budget. Another tip is to include all family members in the budgeting process. So whether you have a partner, significant other, children, anybody in your household that you share money with, get everybody involved and on the same page with the budgeting process. This helps do a couple different things. One, it helps us teach our kids about money early on and have those conversations so that it does become commonplace and comfortable, because really money is something that we should be talking about. It can help us identify our financial goals as a family or as a couple so that we're all working together towards those goals. But it can also make conversations and actions a little bit easier. You know, if everybody's involved in the budgeting process, then everybody's on board with helping to chip in to make sure that we save enough money to be able to take that vacation, which means that everybody's willing to make adjustments as needed. And then the last tip is to give it time to stick. So again, this is not something where, you know, you sit down, you make the budget, and then bam, it's perfect the first month. In fact, I've read and heard that it can take up to 6 months for a budget to stick, you know, for you to go back and make changes and make adjustments to get your budget really where you want it. But then once you do, it's important to take a look at it on a regular basis and make sure that it stays flexible to help you achieve your goals. So we've talked about a lot in the budgeting process. I want to take just a moment to summarize because there are steps to building a good, strong priority spending plan or budget. The first thing you want to do unofficially is to think about those goals, right? Jot them down. Where do I want to be in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, beyond? Think about the financial component for those goals and start to factor that into your budget. Savings is a priority. So then you want to determine your net income. This is consistent, reliable income that you can count on each month. Then you want to track and document your monthly expenses. Compare your actual and planned spending so that you are listing out those expenses, fixed, variable, and periodic, that you know you have to budget for each month. Then you want to do the math, right? Am I spending more or less than I make? And address those gaps if they exist. And then identify possible cash flow solutions. So whether that's using budgeting software, jotting down pay dates and due dates on a calendar, or using the envelope method, whether it's, you know, physically or electronically, to help you keep track of your money. If there are cash flow situations that exist, you want to make sure that you come up with solutions to address them. And then finally, monitor your progress. So take a look at that budget on a regular basis, at least once a month, and be making changes and updates as your situation changes. And then the last thing that I will say is that, once again, if you find yourself thinking over the past 45 minutes or so that we've been talking, wow, this is some really good information. I wonder what my budget looks like. I wonder what it says about me. How much do I really spend each month? Or am I in line? Or where could I cut back? So on and so forth. Give us a call or visit us online. So you can go to moneymanagement.org and schedule your initial debt and budget session free. You can also call us at 866-889-9347 to schedule that initial session. And you can visit us at learn.mmiuniversity.org to take advantage of e-learning courses, articles, a budgeting tool. We do have an interactive budgeting calculator on the site, and additional resources to help you build that strong budget and achieve your financial goals. So I thank you so much for your time and for your participation. I wish you the best of luck in building the budget, sticking to it, and achieving those financial goals. And I look forward to seeing you again in another series.